Whoa, two videos in 1 week and they're both about Mean Girls and I'm wearing the same shirt? That's crazy. Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking about how narration changes the way that people view a main character. And by that I mean, who's the main character of Mean Girls? Think about it. No, I really mean it. Sit down and think. Who is the main character of Mean Girls? Now, the majority of people here are going to say Cady, and then there's going to be a second also majority, but like slightly smaller majority that are going to say Regina. And then there's going to be people who are going to say, well, it's Cady, but it should be Regina. Let's talk about that. In 2004, Mean Girls came out, and I think it's kind of insane to watch that movie and to say that anyone but Cady is the main character. I mean, the thing that, intrigues me most about this movie is how much of a main character Cady is, and how the audience itself gets roped into her fall. Like, she has a fall. That's awesome. You know, not a lot of characters these days have, falls. And she does. And she does a terrific job. And I mean, it's kind of slow at first, but especially as you hear her inner thoughts, it's very, very intriguing. You hear what she's thinking on the first day of school, what she's saying to herself, what she says to others, how she's confused, a little bit clueless, or how the gears in her brain start turning as, she tries to figure out things with Aaron. She talks about, oh, it was surprisingly easy to do this, bad thing. And, you have that scene at the lotion shop Janice works at, where Cady keeps talking about Regina, and she's like, even when I'm not talking about Regina, I'm thinking about Regina. And it's like she genuinely is obsessed with her.
Why are you so obsessed with me?
And that is so cool to watch because it feels terrifying. I mean, when I watched this was like watching a psychological thriller for the first time. Considering the experience I had in middle school, this was a psychological thriller to me. However, what happened is that changed, or well, people's perceptions changed. By all means, Cady should be the most interesting person in Mean Girls, but for some reason, she isn't. And the way that people's understanding and popular culture has changed this is genuinely greatly important in how this has affected the general populace's understanding of not only the plot of Mean Girls, but who the characters are. This is in large part to do with something called fanon interpretation. So canon is the thing that literally happens, and that's with a C, like a cannon, like boom. Then fanon is the fan interpretation, and it usually gets a little bit out of hand and spirals away from who the characters actually are in order to fit tropes or things that people want characters to be. And Mean Girls is a pretty good example of this. I want to make another video about sexuality in Mean Girls, but I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. And I'll say that in canon, Regina is very much straight. I'm sorry. You can't watch Mean Girls 2004 and come away from it thinking that she isn't into men. You can. But I think it's hard, and I think it's a little bit of a reach. In fanon, a lot of the time, she's a very repressed lesbian. And that's, pushing into the mean lesbian trope, which is a thing. People also look at Janice, and they say the same thing. Once again, in the 2004 movie, she is probably attracted to men, but, I think... I think if she's friends with Damien and he's out and everyone thinks she's gay, if she was actually gay, if she thought she was gay, she probably would have come out, but she ends up dating Kevin. So I think that she is at least into men. Once again, fanon will tell you, no, mean lesbian trope. Mean lesbian here, mean lesbian there, mean lesbians for everyone. I don't think I've ever met a mean lesbian in my life. Maybe I just haven't met a lot of mean people, but all the mean people I know of were straight and homophobic. What's really interesting is that by the time the Mean Girls musical came around, was that we had a change of narration. So instead of having Cady narrate her own story, it was Janice and Damien. Which I think it's kind of a silly little thing. They come out on stage, Janice shows you her beautiful artwork, and they start singing a song. And that's lovely. And the same thing held true for the musical movie. However, with that, you take away a lot of Cady's inner thoughts and her agency, and she kind of takes a little bit of a backseat. Now, Cady's songs aren't bad in the musical, but they're not great. The songs that I think of in connection with Cady is the final song, Stars, right? I See Stars, and also Stupid with Love. And those are those are just the songs I think of, right? And they're good songs, but the person who has the best songs is Regina. Like, just straight up, it's Regina. It's the Plastics. The Plastics have the best songs, but Regina being, the main plastic, has more songs in general, and they're better, right? You have the Meet the Plastics songs, which, like, is incredible, like, on all three parts. It's like three separate songs, and it gets chaotic, and it's interesting. It's very, very good. Sexy, obviously, like, Karen does that. That is, like, genuinely one of, I think, the most popular songs in Mean Girls. Like, people referenced that at me before I knew what Mean Girls the musical was. Someone Gets Hurt is fully just incredible. World Burn is also just fantastic, you know? It is so, so good. Those are most of the Plastic songs, and those songs are really, really good. And of course they star Regina George, because Regina George couldn't have anybody else starring in those songs, except for Sexy. Shout out to Karen. Karen's awesome. Good job, Karen. Proud of you. The most songs, I think, if it's not Cady, once again, I don't remember most of Cady's songs, but if it's not Cady, most of the songs are sung by Janice and Damien. And this is because they're the narrators. By making other people the narrators, the musical is kind of removing Cady from her plot and making her a less dimensional character. Of course, having herself narrate in a musical would be a little bit difficult, and it's fun to have Janice and Damien narrate because it gives them significantly more to do, and it kind of seems to make them a through line in the story, which is very fun. And it's not that I disagree with this, but it just sometimes feels like you don't see that fall as much. You don't see Cady and her obsession and just that weird, like, power trip that she goes on from being mean. And sometimes it feels like Mean Girls the musical forgets that Cady too is a mean girl.
I'll tell you why, because you are a mean girl. You're a bitch.
Of course, that's the entire point of the movie, but that feels less like it's the point of the musical. If the musical feels like a cautionary tale, right? You have this thing that could have happened, and Cady kind of skirted around it and she almost escaped. By the time that we get to the movie musical, it feels like Regina is the main character. Renee Rapp is fantastic, and I think maybe part of that is the fact that people are so enamored by Renee Rapp that they are just taken in completely, and they only think Regina and they completely forget about Cady, which, once again, exactly what Regina would want you to think, right? But once you get there, you kind of end up with a version of Cady who's much sweeter and tamer, more docile. That sounds so mean, but it feels very true, because all of a sudden she has what, like 3 songs? And most of the songs that are kept from the musical are Regina's, and the Meet the Plastics is only about Regina, and you have a lot more, like, sympathy and backstory in scenes that are just about Regina. You, once again, don't really see the fall that well with Cady, because she doesn't grasp on to being a mean girl as quickly as she does in the 2004 movie. Not seeing that really gradual fall, and still, like, seeing very much the same person when that fall happens is a little bit sad. Like, there are moments, of course, in the musical where you're like, oh, who have you become? And there's moments like that in the movie musical too. However, my favorite part is this part right here.
Sorry, Regina. Rules are rules.
That is the moment that feels the most true to what actually happens in the original. Like, the fall, it's there. It's not there as much, but it's there. This is not to say that Regina isn't a main character, but she's about as main as a character as Janice. Like, Regina and Janice, in my opinion, are at the same level main character-wise. Regina just gives more main character energy, and she's more interesting because she's a flatter character. And being a flat character means that somehow people find you more interesting because they can project themselves onto you better. I don't know why I'm saying you, like, you, the viewer, are a character. That's not true. You're not a character. You're so real. I think that over time, Cady has lost her agency by losing that narration that Lindsay Lohan was given, and by taking that away, she ends up being less developed as a main character, and in turn, the characters around her become more developed. They have more backstory, and Cady just feels like a vessel for things happening. She doesn't feel like she has agency somehow, not just because she isn't narrating her own plot, but because it somehow feels more shallow. Which is crazy because it's Mean Girls and it's literally about being shallow. I don't really know what the big revelation is, but I felt like sharing because I think that Cady's main characterness has been passed over and she ends up just not being an interesting main character anymore. But when you look back at the 2004 Mean Girls, I think Cady's a very interesting main character. I mean, yes, she does suffer from being the main character in a 2004 movie, but she's very interesting. She has very interesting thoughts that you get to hear, and her fall is just much more illustrated and interesting, and you can really feel the oomph when you realize that she very much is one of the Mean Girls that is talked about. Anyways, that's it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I have one more video to make about Mean Girls, but that's probably going to come out next week, and I'm going to be wearing a different shirt. Till then, thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.